he says, so you've challenged Vladimir Putin to his face? Yes. And then you've challenged Trump, and Trump walks away from you? Yes. And he says, I think you have an interesting story.
Oh, well, John.
Well, John Sweeney, thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
You've been busy. You've been away. You've been travelling. Not to the nicest parts of the world.
Yeah.
Falling over. So what you can't see is I've got an almighty splint. So it's a 30-degree splint on my left leg. And I fell over on black ice in Kyiv, took a tumble, and I tore my quadriceps tendon. I went to hospital. They did X-ray. The Ukrainian surgeon's very good. We've got lots of practice. And they pulled 3 screws in my knee bone and sewed the torn tendon back to that. And I'm basically lying in hospital in Kyiv, a bit like Kafka's man beetle in Metamorphosis.
Right.
Can't move. And then you hear this boom, 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 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then the air raid siren, i.e. it's the wrong way round. And what it is Russian hypersonic missiles which move at 2 kilometers a minute being knocked out of the sky by Ukrainian air defense Patriot missiles, and then the air raid siren.
Right.
These missiles are moving so fast that they beat the air raid siren.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, you know, Sweeney, you're getting too old.
There's that moment.
God. Oh, my God.
But I had to then had to wait a bit. Wait a week. And then my Ukrainian pals put me on the train. And you can't fly back to London, so you take the train all the way to Poland, and then there's a Polish passport queue, and some lovely Ukrainian bloke carries my bag, wheels my suitcase, and then there's everybody parks kind of like, you know, because they can see I'm a foreigner on crutches. I fell over on black ice, like really bad. But, by the way, I've forgotten to point this out, I fell over on the way to the pub.
Right, okay. Well,
I see the skepticism on your face.
Yeah, of course.
I fell over on the way to the pub.
From the last pub.
No.
but from one pub to another pub.
But what I had been doing, sorry, this all sounds rather defensive, but it is true, is I've been delivering crutches.
No.
Yeah.
Wow,
I've been delivering crutches, and then can I swear? And then I ow! And then I fucking need one of them. I want to go back to the charity in Chernihiv. Say, oi,
can I borrow some?
Wait, actually, can I have 2 of the crutches I've delivered back, please?
Wow.
So
it was ironic.
Yeah, very ironic. Yeah. So you've been out there sort of sporadically over the last, since the conflict began.
Start. I pretty much spent more time in Kyiv than not for the last few years.
Yeah.
From before, I actually flew, because you could fly then, before the big war started, on Valentine's Day, 2022. I've had some bad Valentine's Day. That was a really grim one, because you could feel the war, you could feel the Russian killing machine getting stacked up, and I knew they were going to do. I thought they were going to do it, but it didn't make sense, because to fight, you need to have 3 attackers for every defender, and the Ukrainians had roughly 200,000 in the army, but another 100,000 in the cops and border guard and stuff like this. So the Russians needed at least 900,000, better 1 million. But if the Ukrainians are going to fight like tigers, then they needed something like 7-1, which is 2.1 million Russians, as opposed to 300,000 Ukrainians, and they hit it with 200,000. And I thought, they're not going to take Kyiv. And all I did was wait until my mathematics was proved correct. And all I needed, I said to myself, was a hole in the ground and a bottle of Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
But I never had to, it never got that bad, but it was bad. The Russians got within 12 miles.
They got close.
And I wore this silly orange hat because it was in my pocket of my duffel coat. I bought it in a ski resort, and I said to the guy who sold it, "Have you got one in a decent colour?" And he said, no, this is the only one we got left, but for you, €3. But anyway, it became lucky. And what it did, there was a lot of paranoia by the Ukrainians, completely understandably. Imagine if you're living in the centre of London in Charing Cross or Westminster, and the Russian army is in Enfield, kind of like that.
Blimey.
And they were paranoid, and they shot people by mistake for being Russian spies, all that stuff. And this hat kept me alive. And at one point, I auctioned it on for charity, and invited people to pay £5 for a ticket or something like this, and it raised £15,000. So this hat. Anyway, the guy who won it gave it back to me.
Yeah,
which is sweet. But this hat raised £15,000. It's the most expensive item of clothing.
Yeah. And it's for the listeners that can't see you. It's a lovely bright orange hat. I wonder did you wear it because you thought people might think you were Dutch or something?
No, it was just I didn't want to buy it in the ski resort. I'm not. I mean, I like Dutch people. All the Harry Enfield wacky baggy jokes, but no, I just it was an orange hat, kept me warm, and it was and I'm bald, and then suddenly it's freezing, so I wanted a warm hat. But what he did do is it told Ukrainian cops he's not a Russian spy, apart from one Ukrainian soldier. I was convinced, essentially, I was filming stuff on my phone. I was filming myself with the flip phone camera going backwards, looking at me, but it looks as though I'm filming forwards. What I don't know is I'm filming sort of woods and shrubbery, bit of snow coming down, but behind the shrubbery is a Ukrainian anti-aircraft position. And I don't know that. It looks as though I'm filming it, but I'm actually filming myself.
Yeah. And
this bossy boots guy says, stop filming. And I walk on 100 yards, and then I'm flipping the phone, I'm pointing at me, I'm blah, 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 blah. And he comes out the bushes, and I said, I told you to stop filming. And then he said, give me your passport. And I go, well, you're not a policeman. But he's got a machine gun.
Yeah.
Never argue with you.
No, that's not arguing people with machine guns.
Anyway, his name, and he brought me into the Ukrainian intelligence, the SBU, and I'm booked in. And it's kind of like a parking ticket. Once you've got the parking ticket, you have to go through the process. You can't reverse out of it. Mm-hmm. And so and so that's very boring. And eventually I end up going there. But I just say to this guy, just Google me, look at my Twitter picture. And he has it. And then somebody else says, there's about 5 of them, Ukrainian soldiers, Ruskaya Spionka, Russian spy. I'm not a Russian spy. With the kind of level of self-confidence. Anyway, and I was wearing my orange hat and my yellow duffel coat, so I looked like Major Calloway in The Third Man. And then he books me into the SBU, and then he Googles me. And then he says, so you've challenged Vladimir Putin to his face? Yes. And then you've challenged Trump, and Trump walks away from you? Yes. And he says, I think you have an interesting story. Anyway, we become great pals, and he gets me to Bakhmut. Vlad Demchenko on Twitter at Broken Pixel UA. He's a great, funny bloke. During COVID, he hitchhiked to Zambia from Ukraine. He's that kind of
wow.
And he's a real laugh. Anyway, he gets me to Bakhmut 5 times in 2022. It's been taken by the Russians last year. But I go there, and there's one moment where we're by the front line in a trench, and I've taken my hat off. I've got my helmet on, quite right too, my flak jacket. Russians close. Somebody gives me a cup of tea, and on the cup of tea, it's a mug, and it says, and Bova, Bladenchenko points it out, Bova's the short form. Hey, John, it says best Ukrainian grandma on your mug. And Chris Okachoni, who is a great American photographer and a friend of both of us, the 3 of us, our great powers. And Chris goes, hey, Jan, you can be a grandma if you want to be. That's why Ukraine is fighting this war. And we start giggling. And then, but the Russian army is 5 miles away. By the way, there was a Twitter space which Vlad did recently where I told this story, and I said, but the Russian army is 5 miles. No. No, the Russian army was 1.5 miles away.
Wow, okay.
Oh, my God.
That's still quite a way in this stuff. But the idea of drinking tea and cracking jokes and giggling at jokes in a trench, it felt like, it felt like Blackadder.
Yeah. I think that's what makes humans amazing. You never know until you're in some crazy position. I was actually listening to a podcast about the survivors of the plane crash in the Andes with the Uruguayan rugby team and how they were just cracking jokes and, sitting surrounded by all these dead bodies. So,
well, you first of all, they'll be horrified and shocked and awful and feel grim. Yeah. And then and some of these dead bodies would have been their friends. And you do that. And then after a bit, you kind of think, well, there are those of us who survived, and then there's the dead, and we can't do anything about the dead apart from eat them.
Yeah.
Which is what happened, but there we go. But also, you start building some kind of community, some kind of little society, and to do that, you crack jokes.
Yeah.
And black humour is, and I imagine the humour there would be pretty dark.
Yeah.
But it is a kind of shield.
Right, yeah. The camaraderie, kind of, it's like your safety in a way.
Yeah, yes. And it's also a way of retaining your humanity or reaching back towards your humanity and all of that. I mean, for Panorama, I did a film about the Bataclan, the Islamic State massacre, and there were two. There was a kind of running mobile massacre, a series of massacres where they went through a series of sports bars in from one to the other, and then they ended up at the Bataclan, and there was part of their team was in the Bataclan as well. And so I wandered, or rather I followed the footsteps of this team that had started out in the sports bars, and I stepped in other people's blood. This was first thing Saturday morning. The massacre had taken place on Friday night, and so the French authorities hadn't got enough time to tidy everything up. And we interviewed for Panorama this lovely couple. She was French, he was English, and they'd hidden amongst the bodies of the dead. And listening to the hiss from the band's amplifiers, because the moment the gunfire started, the band ran away. They were okay because they were at the very front, and they were on the stage, and the baddies came in for the front, so they had an opportunity to get out. But the roadies, quite rightly, left them the amplifiers on, and so what the couple heard was the screams of people dying, or the gurgling of people dying. It's horrible. And the sound of this hiss, and the sound of everybody's mobile phone going off as mums and dads and loved ones phoning up their loved ones. But if you moved, you died. Anyway, after they'd given us this interview, they were going back. I think that I said, come for, because we'd done all the work, and what happened was we finished the film, and so we missed the last train back to London. But what we're going to do is catch the first train in the morning so we could go out for dinner and have a bit of a relax. It was very, very intense interviewing and filming Saturday and nearly all of Sunday. Sunday evening, I say to the couple, come and eat with us. She's still absolutely, they're both still afraid. She wants to sit in the restaurant with a view of the window so you can see. And I know she's not going to relax like that. And there's a guy called Dave Langan, who is 6'8". He's the biggest cameraman in the BBC. He's freelance, but massive.
Wow.
And I'm big and fat, and another producer was big and fat. So she had a wish, but there was nothing. She couldn't see anything.
Mm.
And then the waiter came over, and I said, "Let's what would you like to drink?" And I said, "Let's start with 5 bottles of Côte de Rhône." And then the humour got darker and darker, and the bloke said at the end of it, "You know what, John? This has been so funny. It's almost been worth it."
Oh. God.
Anyway, I'm guessing on too much.
Not at all, not at all. I was going back to like obviously the situation you've been in Kyiv, and think you've obviously been in a lot of tricky and challenging situations. Has this been up there as one of those situations that you felt particularly emotional about?
Oh, I feel very, very intensely that Ukraine's war is our war. And it feels very different to all the other wars I've covered my whole life. And I've been doing this. I've been going to awful places since '88. The first one I went to was, there was a series of massacres in Burundi, where in fact it was the Hutu massacring the Tutsi. The really bad one was in Rwanda, where it was the other way around. But these were early versions of this terrible ethnic tension between the two groups in Central Africa. Anyway, that was grim. But all the wars, like the big ones everybody knows about, the first Gulf War when the British and the Americans kicked Saddam out of Kuwait, and then the second Gulf War, the one in 2003, the war in Afghanistan, the breakup of Yugoslavia, you could say on the one hand, on the other. And more or less, there was always, for example, the Milosevic Serbs were doing far and away the lion's share of the violence, no question. But what happened in Ukraine was a peaceful democracy was attacked for the second time by the Russians, by Russian fascism. So I feel differently. Somebody's phone's gone off.
Oh, we're going to get in trouble.
Would the child whose phone has gone off, would they please raise their hand?
It's your own time you're wasting. I've just seen it.
Not you're wasting all our time.
Yeah. By the way, you give me flashbacks to double geography at the Barton Preble Grammar School.
I'm sorry.
Sometime in the previous millennium. That doesn't sound good. Anyway, yeah. So there is a kind of, I feel a bit like an American reporter in London in 1940. I do committed to it, but also it's simple. It's that I always like to be on the side which has the best jokes. By the way, there's a kind of subtlety to that, or maybe anyway. It's that dictatorships don't like jokes. And you can't say them in, but in Ukraine you can. It's the whole thing. So it does feel very, very. For me, it's a personal war. It is in part because the West have kept on appeasing Vladimir Putin again and again and again. We've kept on letting him get away with murder again and again and again. And so the reason I went in the first place was to stand up to it. So I have felt afraid, and I've seen some awful, terrible things and things that made me cry. But at the same time, I also feel full of a kind of, this sounds silly, but I'm going to say it, a kind of righteous anger, a kind of, this is wrong. And that righteous anger gets me through some of the awful stuff that you've seen. And in a funny way, it makes the awful stuff more livable with. I feel desperately sorry, for example, for British soldiers who fought in Afghanistan, whose friends were killed, who may have lost their arms or legs or eyes fighting the Taliban, only to wake up one morning to discover everything you did was pointless. Now that is, I think that would be awful. Whereas at least writing words that help Ukraine fight the Russian fascism is, it's something I believe in. I really, really do. So, and that makes it more livable with them. So I'd like to quote that back to me as I'm sitting there in the hospital, not being able to move, listening to the air raid siren come on after the explosions.
Yeah.
So that was, actually, it's that stuff, it just makes me kind of, hello. But the really sad stuff is, I went to Children's Hospital very early on, the Russian army's 12 miles away, and by which you can hear the artillery drill. So it's just kind of... constant soundtrack. And you can hear it. Some of the time it's depending on the wind, but if it's coming this way, then you can hear it, no question. And down in the basement there are all these kids. There's a clown who's making them laugh, and they've got yellow faces because they've got something wrong with their liver or their kidneys, and they're on dialysis machines. And if they leave the city without their machines, they will die because they need the machines to keep themselves alive. But if they stay in the city, they may die because the Russian army will kill them. And the sense of anxiety and that thing. And the clown was making all the kids laugh. And I had to wear a mask because of the possibility of COVID, infection, all that stuff. And I hated wearing those masks. And then, although I understood the scientific case for them, I'm not saying that argument. But when I went outside, I was grateful for the mask because I was so moved, I was crying my eyes out. And it's that stuff that gets to you.
John, seeing so much devastation, have you found that it's affected how you view the mundane, like everyday, people's normal, quote-unquote, struggles, when people are moaning about work or traffic or the small things? Has it made you less patient?
First world problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, you still, listen, I've lived my life, I've done all this stuff, and but I get annoyed. I get, it's, computer says no. It still drives me nuts. Also, there was a poet, this Ukrainian soldier poet who was killed the other day, and he wrote a very, very lovely and moving poem about just wanting to enjoy ordinary life. Yesterday I was with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter, and we watched Sleeping Beauty, and then we watched Snow White. No, you wouldn't actually, but I kind of really, really enjoyed. I thought Snow White was fantastic, And then I'm singing, and this isn't. It's not quite ordinary frustration, but this is ordinary, very, very simple pleasures. I'm watching, my granddaughter who's almost 3, from dancing to the dwarfs, and I, hi ho, hi ho. And normal stuff is lovely. And then part of normal life is normal frustrations, all of that. Occasionally it gets to you. I remember when I came back from Rwanda, Burundi in 1988, I went to the dog food aisle. I didn't have a dog. I've got a dog now, and I love my dog, but I didn't have one. And I saw the wealth of food supply for dog and cat owners compared to, I've seen a 2-year-old African kid, a little girl who had her arm shot off. And so she had a stump and a bandage, and she was an orphan. And I took a picture for the Observer, my then paper, and the light from the flash frightened her, and she started to cry.
Aww.
And I thought, for God's sake, I needed to take a picture, and we ran the picture. And then I was, this is like a week later in the supermarket aisle back in London, and I start to cry. And this is what happens, is you get a moment when you're feeling safe and comfortable, and then suddenly the emotion hits you from, and you're not expecting it.
Yeah, safe to process then, I guess.
Sorry, say again?
Well, I guess it's safe to process that.
Yes, it's safe to process, but it also happens to me. After the Bataclan film, I was incredibly professional. I didn't cry once. I interviewed everybody, and also part of the role of being an interviewer is that you don't ask patsy questions. Quite tough for people to elicit, to get them there, and it's how you do it. Because if you're too sympathetic, then everything kind of bleeds to vanilla. It doesn't work. You kind of want to get people back there, but that there's a kind of cruelty to it. I think it's necessary because otherwise you understate. I mean, if you have more time, it would be easier, but of course you don't have time. It's against you. So, and that's quite a hard process. Nevertheless, I did it all. Then on the Wednesday following the massacre on Friday, and our film had gone out on the Monday, so 3 days later, I'm on my own in the kitchen cooking, and there's an interview on the radio, and there's a posh BBC reporter. England are playing France in Birmingham, and there's a Brummie supporter, and the posh guy says, "So you're going to sing the Marseillaise? Do you know the words of the Marseillaise?" And I'm going to do a bad Brummie accent. Actually, anyway, the Brummie guy, I won't do the bad accent. The Brummie guy goes, "No, I don't know the words, but we're going to make, can't we?" And I find myself bursting with laughter and then crying and then not being able to stop.
Oh.
Then, safe to process.
Wow.
It's a thing.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. And it's so refreshing as well to see somebody that has seen so much still not becoming sort of desensitized to it,
No, I don't think you do, or I don't. It's I don't want to do. I kind of, and also my friend Paul Conroy says this too. He was a photographer who was with Marie Colvin, who was killed in Syria, and he had so many bits of metal in his leg, it was ridiculous. And he's kind of jeering at me now, saying, you just got a little, flesh wound. Because he was almost dead. And but he says, Ukraine's my last war, and I it's mine too as well. I don't want to go anywhere else to report from the front line. And I kind of don't really, I mean, like every time you go towards the guns, you think, what are you doing, you old fool? And this almost domestic accident I've got here is maybe a wake-up call. But at the same time, the idea that Russian fascism is allowed to get away with this, that I can't stand.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose with, mainstream media and television and films and video games and 24-hour news cycle, there does seem to be a risk of people that aren't experiencing these things in person becoming so desensitized to seeing terrible things. So, yeah, I would imagine that in some ways the fact that you're seeing these things in person is, even more eye-opening.
Well, it's eye-opening, but also as human beings, you get used to things.
Mm.
So, I mean, I've got Ukrainian friends who say, I'm getting bored with the war. So you kind of get used to it. So, for example, it's very uncool when the air raid siren goes off in Kyiv to react to it, other than say,
really?
Could I have another bottle? Because well, I mean, some people will go and hide in the shelters, but most people, air defense has got better, and there is a kind of. And you're pretty certain that the missiles are going to get knocked out of the sky, so long as the West keeps on supporting Ukraine. And that's an issue in particular for the Americans. If Trump gets elected, scary.
Well, let's talk about Trump, because obviously you've met the man and challenged him about his building contracts.
And I challenged him about his relationship. It was a building contract, but it was about his... the guts of it was about his relationship with a Russian-born gangster called Felix Sater, who's been in a lot of trouble, who, when he fell out with somebody, a fellow, he was on Wall Street, and he fell out with a fellow stockbroker, and Felix Sater's way of carrying on the argument was to smash a margarita glass a cocktail glass, and stabbed the guy, and the poor man had 110 stitches in his neck. So it's that kind of guy was working for Donald Trump. And then Trump kind of said, I know the guy, but it's not, and then I couldn't walk out the deal with him or these people he was representing. And then I said, but, this guy was connected with the mafia, Mr. Trump. And Trump looks at me and goes, maybe you're thick, John. But you can't walk out the contract. And actually what he was saying, I think, was untrue. We found that out. We found out the precise paperwork a bit later. But for quite a while, the catchphrase in the BBC Panorama office was, maybe you're thick, John. So Trump's a really odious man. He's a narcissist. And his narcissism comes out of a very, very weak sense of self, I think. That actually, far from being secure, he is like a toddler who craves for people to tell him how wonderful he is. Mary Trump has written an amazing book, but what happened was that Trump's mother was seriously unwell when he was very little, and he was starved of his mother's love at the very moment when he needed it most. And this makes you, in a funny way, it can make people incredibly successful because he's a pitiless psychopath, I think, and that he has no empathy for other people, like Vladimir Putin. And he is well capable of lying and lying and lying, and there are no tells because this is the perceived truth. And at the same time, his narcissism and his vanity is kind of eggshell thin. And yet he is both incredibly lacking in empathy, but he can smell other people's fear. So he doesn't really care about what other people feel, but he can smell their fear and then can pounce on them. So what he did when Hillary stood was he would invite some of the women who said that they'd slept with Bill Clinton as his guests on the front row. And that's the kind of... And what Putin does is when he had a big powwow with Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, she doesn't like dogs. She's afraid of dogs. And in comes Putin's big Labrador. And instantly, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is shivering with fear.
God.
And Putin affects not to clock this. He enjoys the suffering. He enjoys his victim twisting in agony. And that's... And kind of my job as a reporter is to identify... Can I swear?
Yeah.
Identify these fuckers and give them a slap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And we love you for it.
Yeah.
Love you for it. It's interesting what you were saying about how a lot of these people are successful. And I guess it kind of ties in with you're only going to be as successful as you truly believe you're worth being successful. You can be successful. And a lot of these people, they're like, yeah, I can do it. Most people would have a sense of sort of grace and self-deprecation. Most people might feel a bit weird and self-conscious about running for presidency. But I feel like narcissists, they sort of lack that slightly, where they're like, no, I could do this.
So there is a part of you at any point where you just go, I'm not good enough for this. And I'm trying to write a novel now about the Battle of Kyiv, and part of me, I get this kind of imposter syndrome, or this isn't bloody Graham Greene. And then the thing is that becomes an enemy of creativity. And okay, it may not be Graham Greene, but actually you were there, and there are things you can say in a novel about the kind of the smells and flavors, what it felt like for just a character who's a fictionalized me. I can do something. So and I need to sort of push away and continue with that as best I can. But in terms of thank God I wasn't born in America, so I can't become the president of the United States. But there's also you're not suited to do that. And the narcissists and I think Trump is a narcissist and he's a bit of a psychopath. Putin's worst. What's fascinating is when the two met in Helsinki in 2018, and the gossip is that, of course, they deny this, but that Putin has got some kind of sex compromise on Trump.
Interesting.
And when they met, Trump is normally so cocky, and he looked bowed and defeated and humiliated. This was after a kind of hour-plus meeting where there were no American officials present or American translator. The Russians did all the translating. And Putin looked like a blackmailer who'd got his cash. He looked like a cat who'd got the cream.
It's met his match.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But Putin, too, the word is, there's something weird and funny about his upbringing. His official mum and dad seemed to be there was some, his mum in quotes, was something like 41 when she had him, and she'd been through the siege of Leningrad, which was an awful time. And so the working assumption is that his official mum and dad are not his true mum and dad, and that he, like Trump, was denied a proper mother's love when he needed it most, when he was a toddler. And there's a friend of mine who's a professor of psychiatry, University of California, has said this is a common trait in the big psychopaths. And he also thinks it also happened with Hitler and Mao and Stalin. And it leaves people with an ability to lie, an ability to be totally lacking in empathy, an incredible a real hunger for success. They're just horrible human beings.
Yeah. A lot of serial killers as well, and they find that it's either some kind of childhood trauma or neglect or a head injury. It's
yes, and the head injury can cause can cause the physical impact on the part of the brain which houses empathy. So there is a bit of neuroscience which cross hatches with this area where kids or particular people have been brought up with because they lack a mother's love, then they don't get empathy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating that so many of these people rise to the highest offices in the world.
But also some of them, so for example, both the guy who killed Joe Cox, who's far right, and the people who did the Islamic State massacre, and it was 2016, I did all of the terror attacks in London, all of them for Newsnight. I was the first reporter on the scene for Newsnight. Nearly always by bicycle, by the way, because it's the fastest way of getting around central London. And what was common about them was, so for example, the Islamists who'd been radicalised, there's actually quite a lot of people, say maybe 20,000 Islamists in London or in Britain who've been radicalised, but they don't kill. So they have all of the kind of the theoretical reasoning to kill according to the warped and false logic that's running around in their heads, but they don't do it. And then there's this extra thing, which means they do it. And you wonder, is it the cause or is it the violence within them which has sought the cause, which legitimizes the violence, the enactment of anti-empathy or the absence of... And that is also the case with the guy who killed Joe Cox, because he was radicalized far right. There's a kind of mirror image of the two things, but also that there was something. He used to scratch his arm so much it would bleed, and there is a kind of he's committing violence to himself. So there are some people. Some of these psychopaths become presidents, like Putin and Trump, and so I'm not exaggerating. I think Trump is like this, and I think some of the stuff he's saying now is truly frightening. But also, if they're less gifted, that they'll end up also becoming kind of famous for doing something terrible and ghastly.
Yeah.
But they're attracted by this kind of stuff.
Fame and power.
And that's the kind of, I mean, anyway, it's, I haven't, part of this, I mean, I think people listening will think he's got this off a cereal packet, hasn't he? Right? But no, it's actually my experience of reporting on these stories, and then you find there is something, there's a crazy love of big violence that is driving this. Less the ideology, and the ideology gives you an approval to hate the other. So the ideology is necessary but not sufficient. They also have to be psycho.
Yeah, it's funny because I think it was literally like yesterday or the day before, I saw something about narcissism. I was reading something and it literally listed out all the traits of someone with a diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder, and it was every single thing that you just said. It was a kind of unstable sense of self that stems from childhood, and therefore, they can't have anyone disagree with them because that shakes their sense of self. It's very fragile. And so, if someone disagrees with you or questions what you're saying, you just lash out by saying something like, well, John, you must be thick and stuff like that. It's just aggression and rage. And
you're joining Trump.
Yeah. It's every single thing that you said, it makes perfect sense. So I don't think you've just read off a cereal packet.
I mean, talking of weird and wonderful things, obviously, you first came into my knowledge with your episodes of Panorama when you spoke to the Scientologists.
I knew you were going
The
to say
church.
that. When you said weird and wonderful, I thought, here we go.
You knew where I was going.
To the Scientologists.
So, Giles, are you a member of the church?
I'm not a member.
But you're wearing black.
I am wearing brown, so I might.
Okay, all right.
Well, John, I've actually gone into the Church of Scientology in London.
Yeah, and how quickly did you leave?
Oh, I went in there deep. Me and my friend, we went for a day trip because we just find it so hilarious.
This is when you were younger? Or...
No, this was like a couple of years ago. Okay. But we gave fake names.
Yeah, fake names.
Yeah, because it wasn't because we were interested in joining it. It was because we just thought the whole thing is so interesting and bizarre. We went in, I gave the name of someone that I went to school with, so they probably are now hounding her. Poor girl.
By the way, did you like this girl, or did you find her slightly irritating?
Yeah.
So tell the truth.
I mean, she was one of my friends. Looking back, I think... Yeah, she was like she was the naughty kid, and she always used to get me dragged into all the naughty stuff. So actually, it was bad.
You got your revenge by topping her into the Church of Scientology.
Tell you does want to join.
Yeah.
I used her name, and then my friend used a mixture of like his middle name and mum's maiden name or something. And we walked in, and they were like, "Would you like to do a free personality test?" And without even thinking, I was, yeah. And my friend just sort of like barges me out of the way. It's like, no, we don't. We just want to have a look around. There's this couple in front of us. They do the personality test. We were in there for hours, like going through all the books, looking at all the videos, doing a little investigation. We walk out on our way out hours later, and this poor couple have been separated, taken into separate rooms, and they're still sitting there having their personality test. Basically being like hounded.
They weren't being audited, were they?
No. Auditing is later.
That's later on. That's another level up.
So the result of the test, I think it's called the Oxford Personality Test, or what they call it, with highfalutin nonsense.
I see you're an expert. You've been down that road, haven't you?
I feel like you may have had this test.
Yeah.
I failed it. I've written a book about it. It's called The Church of Fear. And... by the way, people don't know what we're talking about.
Yes.
Look it up on YouTube. There's a very funny moment, 41 seconds, put in Sweeney Scientology, where I really lose my temper with the Church of Scientology. And I go nuts. And they say, so when Sweeney was asked about this, his reaction was unexpected, to say the least. You there for the beginning of the interview. So I just thought I'd do that. Anyway, so
That's what we were waiting for.
so I really lose my temper, and the BBC thought hard about sacking me, and some of the bosses wanted to sack me, but it was played in my favour that I lost my temper in grammatical English and I didn't swear.
You're a very polite rage.
The bosses knew this, and my dad had just died, and we buried him, and then we had his funeral, and then the next day I flew out to go to war with Scientology, and so that had they fired me, then they would have confronted with the story. But anyway, there's a moment when there's this terrible loss of temper. I apologise then, I apologise now. But they really had wound me up. And they'd come, there'd been a car chase in LA. They'd come to our hotel room at midnight, secretly filming us. But we worked out a series of... there was a very, very smart and tough producer, Sarah Mole, from Essex. And she sits me down before we start. She says, "Hey, John." She actually talks a bit posher than this. But I like it. Hey, John. She's from Upminster, which is posher. But anyway, "Hey, John, you seen Jurassic Park?" And and I said, "Yes, sir, I have." And she goes, "You seen that bit with the tethered goat and the T-Rex comes for it?" Yeah. "Well, you can bleat, can't you?" And my job was to be the tethered goat, and all we had to do was to film everything. And so whenever I had two sound mics on me, two sound mic packs every time, whenever I moved. So if one battery failed, I had a fallback. And we had a small little camera. We filmed it in 2007. So we had a little camera as well as a big camera. And Sarah always had a little camera. And so when they ambushed us at midnight, Bill Brown, the cameraman, was able to film everything while Sarah went and got the big camera from Bill's room and then came down, and then he was able to shoot it with the big camera. And I, anyway, they were, it was incredibly intense and mad. And there was a kind of, so what you've got is I think you've got a psychopath at the top. They deny this. They say that I'm a bigot and a drunk and psychotic. I'm, thank you, and thank you. I do drink too much, although I am doing dry January. But they kind of, there is a, so what you've got is a kind of like a mass psychosis, a cult. It is a cult, I think. They deny it, but I think it's a cult. And it's very hard to deal with. But there's a moment when the film comes out. Basically, they run this 40-second clip of me losing it, and I look like a nutter. And they put it out on Saturday afternoon. So all of the Sunday papers have got it. And I'm an idiot and a fool for the 2.5 days until Monday evening. BBC management said nothing. The film's going out, nothing. And it feels like that I'm some gladiator and we're waiting for the public to
Yeah.
thumbs down or thumbs up.
Yeah.
And then this is before Twitter, 2007. But then the emails arrive and it's just incredible. And then one of them is like from a schoolgirl. Mr. Sweeney, I'm sorry, but I've got a crush on you. But I need to say that I am the vice president of the Royal College of Psychiatry. From a bloke. And then my favourite was from the Green Watch of Lambeth River Fire Brigade. Mr. Sweeney, we were with you the whole way, and when you lost it, we all lost it along with you. But frankly, we all thought you should have punched that cunt.
Yeah. Yep.
So it turned out that anyway, a couple of years later, I'm in Pakistan doing a story about the the Pakistani version of the Taliban, burning down girls' schools, killing people, and doing seriously well against the Pakistan state. And there is a civil war in the Swat Valley, and I'm arrested by the Pakistani secret police, and the ISI, and they torture people and they murder people, and they're not nice. And the guy says to me, "Who are you and where are you from?" "My name's John Sweeney. I'm from BBC Panorama." I give him my passport and press card. He gives it to a goon who walks off, gets into a car, drives off into the dust. And then this guy turns on me and he says, Oxford accent, pitted skin, nice suit, perfume. Didn't like him. And he says, "Who are you and where are you from?" And my fixer and my Pakistani cameraman started to shake with fear. And I looked this guy in the eye, said, "My name's John Sweeney, and I work for BBC Panorama. And I've got 7 million hits on YouTube. Look me up." So I'd like to thank the Church of Scientology.
Yeah. Now everyone's terrified of you.
Because he came back with my passport and press pass, and I said, "I'm terribly sorry. It appears to have been a mistake."
That's brilliant.
So, and actually I did the same trick in Russia with the Russians. "You're not a journalist." "Yes, I am." "You're not a journalist. You don't have a press pass." "I don't have a press pass because the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs ran out of ink and they weren't able to print my press pass." "You're not a journalist." "Prove it." "Look me up on YouTube." And there's this fantastic thing of me going nuts. So anyway,
don't mess with this.
Yeah. Anyway, you're both invited to the Church of Sweeneytology.
Yeah, I would love to be. I would love to be a member. I mean, John, look, you've had an amazing career. It's a life well lived, and I just wondered if there's anything left that you obviously you're writing a lot at the moment, but are there any lasting ambitions that you haven't been able to fulfil yet?
I'd like to be world king.
Yeah,
nice.
But Boris had a real good go at that, and look what happened to him. I'd like to sail down the Dnipro without being killed by the Russians. Oh yeah, I'd like the Russians to leave Ukraine, and that would be nice because it's a beautiful river. I think that'd be really good fun. But what's weird about I'm 65, and what's fun? I mean, and my body's sort of slowly falling apart. Not just my broken knee, but you kind of feel. Philip Larkin, who was a wonderful poet and a miserable sod, writes about old age and then the only end of age. So you feel that coming at you, but at the same time there's something lovely. And I don't want to say wisdom because it's too pompous, but you've got this kind of archive of experience in your head. So when bad stuff happens, you can go, well, that's bad, but it's not awful. And it gives you a resilience, which is great, and a feeling of there are terrible things that can happen, but it's not. Anyway, this archive helps you deal with life, so that's nice. I'd like to. I enjoy life. I'd like to. I've got a couple more novels in me. Who knows what happens next? Who knows?
Well, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
John, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
And you're sure you're not from the Church of Scientology?
Definitely not. No,
Yeah,
you
this is
know about it.
Undercover work.
Know about it.
We'd be goading you and interrupting you and just being arseholes, really.
No,
I mean, we are filming you.
Yeah.
Also, No, but also, you're doing a dry January too.
Well, I don't. I'm actually
Dry life. Dry life.
I'm
but you're not.
I'm not, no, but I don't really drink enough to justify doing dry January, to be fair. I have a drink every once in a while.
Right, yes.
I might
It
just
will be
drink
good
though
company
tonight.
for you today.
I might drink tonight just to piss you both off. But I'm driving, so probably not a good idea. Yeah, no. John, I feel like I could listen to you tell stories for hours. So we are going to the pub now, aren't we? So we'll just do that.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
thank you.